What's going on, everybody? This is your favorite Uncle Drew here, coming at you live and direct, as I always like to say. Um, we're going to start popping on and we're going to start making these things something that you can come back to watch, to look, to listen to. And like I said, I wanted to talk about books more in 2025, and I wanted to do that with people. I wanted to do that on my own. I wanted to find a way to make it possible to be able to do that. And sometimes that's just me just making up some content and being able to come on here and discuss it and talk about it. So far in 2025, we make a book goal every year. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing that, and it's really helped me to continue to read and push forward and learn about a lot more things that I've been kind of put my head to the ground to. And that has to do with the people and the young men that I mentor, the clients that I have. I always want to be able to point them in the right direction of a good book, somebody who's had a relatable story that they've had, and and honestly, I think it's one of the best things for me because it makes me not just be one track minded in the things that I'm reading and the substance that I'm digesting. I want to make sure, of course, I read about stuff that I really like, and by saying that, I really like to read about people who dealt with a similar upbringing as me, or hardships. I don't necessarily mean the same, but people who went through hardships before they got where they at. And to be honest, we can point to a lot of ourselves, everybody walking God's green earth on a daily basis, and say everybody has been through and sustained through something, and they're still alive, walking around and being themselves. But in books, and we usually write books about famous people or pretty notable people that have done some things. I've noticed that a lot of people that are actors, that are football players, that are entertainers, that are very successful, didn't always start out that way. And they've always had to, in quotation marks, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But more so than that, they've been through things. They've been through trials and tribulations which have shaped their life and their journey and what they wanted to accomplish and reach. And I think that's the thing that really, really helps us in the mission that we're on and what we're trying to chase after. And so, without further ado, I just want to go through. Want to talk briefly about what I've read so far this year, which is only 2 books, and also what I am currently reading, and why that makes me so. I can't even think of the word, but it. I'm optimistic about my reading for this year. I've been stuck in those places where I've wanted to say, hey, I want to read 30 books and I don't care what books they are. I just want to read. And some were and others were good. I've been in that place where I've done very strategic and a lot more concentrated reading on wanting to read stuff to better myself or my career path that I'm on or what I'm doing as my life goals. And then there's sometimes I get to reading and I say, I just want to read some stuff that interests me. I want to read some stuff that gets my mind going. I want to read some things that cause me to think a little bit more critically and have conversations with my friends, my family, people that I come across with on a daily basis. And this year, my book goal is 26, which is good. It's probably one of no, last year was 20, so it's not too far off of where I've had it. I've had it in the 20s, I've had it up in the 30s, but having it at 26, the 26 letters in the alphabet, I always try to do some strange and weird things. Don't worry about that. That's me. I'm a little crazy. But having it at 26 is probably just the right number for me to be able to take my time with some reads, to think and digest after I read them, to read some longer books, to read some shorter books, and not worry about how long it's going to take me to finish or things of that nature. And so I really like the goal I set at being at 26. And then also the books. Sometimes I'm reading books and I go off on tangents. I was explaining this to a friend a couple days ago. There are times that, I've set in my life, hey, I'm going to read these 3 books. These are my next 3 reads. And I've read some pretty heavy books that have kind of, take a toll on you or emotionally draining for you to read them or just very tough. And Sometimes I don't want to be held to those standards of saying, well, I said I was going to read all three of these. I need to continue what I was doing. That's a little bit of the athlete in me. That's a little bit of the football player in me, where sometimes we're always in competition. We're always trying to outdo ourselves. And there's times I need to tell myself, yo, dude, just slow down, chill out, relax. It's okay. This isn't a competition. This isn't a race. The books that you're reading aren't for a school project or a test or an assignments that's due. All these books are for you. Even when I have book club, like, of course, we're going to talk about the book and I want to have it read. But what are you getting out of this stuff in a whole, I want to say. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go into a couple of the books that I've already read this year. And I'm going to talk about actually what I'm reading right now, too. And so, one of the great things, one of the greatest things at the end of last year, I picked up the book James by Percival Everett. It's awesome. If you want to check out that video, it is up with me and my boy Key Travis Squire. And it was a very good read. If you haven't read it yet, it's definitely something you should definitely check out. And sometimes when I grab hold of an author, I want to read a couple of their works um, consecutively or within the same couple of months to see how their writing has evolved, to see, maybe some early work opposed to something that just came out. I like to have stuff to compare to because um, as I'm looking and I am not weighing because it's not weighing or grading, but while I'm examining these authors, I want to be able to see, okay, this they got better with their writing. And this is an interesting thing about authors too. They grow, they develop, but also like no books are the same. And I say that just being an actor who went to acting school. No role you take is going to be the same. No preparation you take for each character is going to equal the same character it was for a different movie because there's all these extenuating circumstances that come in to make it be what it is. And I like that part about it. I guess that's the reason why some people read a book and they're like, man, I wasn't feeling this, or this is nothing like this last book I read. Every book and every time they decide to start a book and to write one and to publish one, um, there should be some growth to it. There should be some difference in it. And that's the one thing I wanted to see with Percival Everett. I picked up Erasure, and for those that don't know, History X is a movie that came out last year, did very good, won a couple of awards. It was starring Jeffrey Wright and also had Sterling K. Brown in it. I always kind of slow down on his name because for some reason I get it mixed up with Michael K. Williams sometimes, and sometimes I throw their names. It's the K in the middle that throws me off. But it's a very good cast and it's a very good movie. And as I become more of an avid reader, I want to read more books and look at the movies. Like, there's always that Hollywood adaptation of things, which is fine. But we all know that Hollywood is Hollywood, and Hollywood kind of breaks off and does their own things and makes Hollywood esque type movies. And so that's one thing I like to do. I dislike seeing the movie before I read a book, and it's something I've kind of just started for the most part. But I like to create the story in my head. And it was a little bit weird with this book, knowing that Jeffrey Wright starred in it, knowing who the brother was, knowing who the mom was, knowing who the sister was. But the book matched up very well with the movie. And that's what happens sometimes when Hollywood works in tandem with the author, even when they purchase the rights to a book to make it into a movie, by having the author come in as a producer on it or someone who is overlooking everything that's going on. But this book is very good. At times it got lengthy with the academic jargon that the main character Monk sometimes gets to because he is an author and a professor. Speaks to some very, I don't even know what to call them actually, not mythical, but the things he talks to are head and shoulders above what a lot of us want to learn or have learned in life. And so just knowing that about Monk, and sometimes you're reading in his book and it goes through long passages of talking about these things that I didn't even understand. So if you did, kudos to you, but I didn't even understand them. And sometimes I got a little bit bored in that realm, but for the most part, it was a very good book. And especially The difference between this book and the movie, and not to be too much of a spoiler, but the difference between this book and the movie is the movie was kind of spliced in with what he was talking about. And let me take a minute to talk about what I'm saying. Monk writes a book under an alias about the stereotypical life of a black person growing up in the hood, three baby mamas, three babies, drop out, 20 years old, doesn't want to work, all this other stuff. And he does that because one of his work is pretty much like the publishers are not accepting his work because they're saying it's not good enough. So in the movie, he sits down, he writes this book. You see everything playing out in front of him. It's actually really funny. But in essence, this book ends up getting picked up. They want to publish it. They give him an advance. They want to make it into a movie. In the movie, with Jeffrey Wright, it's pretty much spliced a little bit. You see him writing a little bit here. You see it coming to fruition here, and you see him coming back to it right here while he's writing, and you see it come to fruition. And in this book, it pretty much is a couple chapters are written of him writing this book as well. And so you go from reading this book to the point that he sits down and he writes the book he writes, or he writes a small, not a small preface, he writes a couple chapters of it. And you pretty much read it exactly how it's written or how he wrote it to be turned into his publisher. So you end up reading upwards of, I want to say 10 chapters or so of a book like this, 10 or 15 chapters. And to me, it was pretty funny doing that because it brought me a little bit more into what he was writing, although we know the gist of it from the movie. But Percival Ever is just, he's an awesome writer. He's awesome with how he writes. He is thoughtful with how he writes. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things as I read this book, and I talked about this a couple of days ago. All, all, not lies. It's not lies. With all with all jokes, there are truths in it. Dang, what is up with my English today? With all truths, with all jokes, there are truths in them. And as bad as it sounds with network executives or publishers saying, telling a black author, hey, this isn't black enough, we need something blacker that speaks to the black experience. By you telling that to by being a white person, telling that to a black person is pretty much a slap in the face. It's pretty much saying, I know what black is better than you do, or I can articulate it better than you can about what we want. And so that's the trope with the book and the movie about a black author who was highly respected at one point in time, is pretty much writes a book for fun or as a fu to publishers, and it ends up being a great hit, and he cannot believe it. So, but just this book, there's so many different layers with it, with some of the stuff he's going through with his family, some realizations he's coming through with his dad, his mom going through some health issues. Like he's getting hit from all different sides right now. And I think that Jeffrey Wright did a great job in the movie. But by just reading this book, I'm able to see everything that was meant to be seen in the movie. And it's so hard to bring a movie and convey a point in an hour and a half and 2 hours and get the viewer into it and pull them in and be able to answer all the same questions or some of the same things that were in the book. So that is why I'm always pushing people to open books, to take time to read a story, to sit down and have it sit with you, think about it, converse about it with others, do those types of things to make the conversation a lot deeper in what you're going through and what we're talking about. So that is Erasure by Percival Everett. If you haven't read it yet, definitely pick it up. I gave it 5 stars because it was a 5-star read. And it wasn't too long. I want to say it was about upwards of 200, maybe 300 pages, if that. I might be being generous. I don't have the book with me right now to be able to tell you, but I would say more around 250, 300 pages. So not too long, not too hard. Now we'll go to another one of my favorite authors. So Colson Whitehead. I read the book Sag Harbor. And I read the book Sag Harbor because I had read other books like Crook Manifesto, The Intuitionist, I want to say there's one more somewhere in there. Harlem Shuffle, if I didn't say Harlem Shuffle yet. Crook Manifesto, Harlem Shuffle, The Intuitionist. And those are three books right there. Great books about the Black experience, about New York, the East Coast. What I remember about Colson Whitehead is that he's very descriptive when he writes. And he writes about things that I can see, that I can smell, that I can feel, that I can experience, and especially from the Black perspective. And I will say with Sag Harbor, I was disappointed because I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. Um, he still writes descriptively. He still writes great, but he pretty much writes about a summer of a young man and his family who pretty much have a beach home that's been in their family for years that they go to every summer. And as they get older, their parents start leaving them out there in the summer, so they're kind of up to their own devices. They're working summer jobs. They're talking to girls. They're kind of trying to fit in with life. But as school lets out, these are Black kids, and so they go to school in the city, but in the summertime they're out here at this beach house in Sag Harbor. I almost forgot what it was called. Stupid me. It's named after the book, Sag Harbor. And with that, it was just very long and drawn out. Um, there's no great way for me to say it. I'm reading it and I'm waiting for something big to happen in the story. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I'm getting one fourth of the way through. I'm getting half of the way through. I think there's about to be something that happens, and we move past that, and there's nothing. We get to three-fourths of the way through, and I'm convinced that this is how the book goes the rest of the way through. And honestly, if I would have gone in knowing that, it's pretty much just talking about a summer, reflecting on a summer, talking about a summer, and reflecting on summers down at the beach with their family, their friends, their brother, the main character. And I was just very unfulfilled, but the writing is still great. And now I gave this book 2 stars out of 5. It was just very slow moving. It was very slow paced. There's a lot of, not a lot, there's a good amount of funny stuff that happens in the movie. I will say that. There's a good amount, got a hair in my mouth from my beard. There's a good amount of funny stuff that happens in the book, but it's pretty much just storytelling 101. And I can see this type of stuff as I was a young man. Those summer times with your friends out and about, riding bikes, getting into a little bit of trouble, playing with BB guns, playing sports, falling in love with that girl that you like and getting time with her. Um, and so it's a interesting read. I wouldn't recommend it, but also I like to get on here and not just trash books and talk about everything I hated about it. It was written very, very well, and it took me back to times when I was a kid with my friends, what summers were like for me. It made me reflect back on those. And so maybe if you've had one of those lives where it's summertime, you're not traveling around playing sports, you're actually being able to be a kid and enjoy life. This is a very important book to pick up because it's not super wordy, it's not super complicated, it's not even super eventful in the entirety of it, but it's a well written book. I almost said it was a good book. It's a well written book. So once again, that is Sag Harbor by one of my favorite authors, Colson Whitehead. This probably falls really, really low on the totem pole as far as my favorite books of his, probably number 4 out of the 4 I read. But that won't stop me from continuing to pick up books by Colson Whitehead. And now we'll go to what we're currently reading. And I've always had the I've always had I've always had this very weird power, and the weird power is as soon as I read or am thinking to read a book or see a documentary about some very illustrious or famous person, they pass away or they get sick. Now, that's not something I'm very proud of, and I think that's the way the universe works with me and on me, is that I'm not going to say I'm kinetically attached to people or anything like that, but there's just this weird feeling I get where I'm like, there's this person who's an actor that I really like. I want to read a book on him soon. And lo and behold, not too long, or they're in, it's just some weird connection, or they're in a book that I'm reading about at that time. And they end up passing, oh, that's just my gray hair. They just end up passing around that time, or I had just read about them in a previous book. One of the funny things is, and not to get too much off track, a book I was reading called Perfect Eloquence by Vin Scully. He passed away a couple years ago, but there was just all this stuff with how the Dodgers played last year. I saw this book in Barnes and Noble in a bookstore, and I really wanted to pick it up. And it was I always try to go to the bookstore, and I'm not one of the guys that's the people that sees a book, and I'm like, oh, this cover looks interesting, I'll buy it. Like I'll go to the bookstore, I'll see a book, I'll pick it up, I'll read the back, I'll put it back, I'll go home, I'll research it a little bit more, I'll see what the reviews say, and then maybe next time, or I'll order it, online or something like that, or next time I'll go to the bookstore, I'll grab it. But I'm also trying to do better at buying books, so I try to stay away from it. And and I'm sorry, this wasn't even the book I was talking about or referring to. But Vince Scully passed away a couple years ago, and I wanted to read about the life of Vince Scully, and that's what I did. So, but in other words, James Earl Jones, who passed away last year, I was reading a book called Why We Love Baseball. And Why We Love Baseball was going through all the baseball movies and Hollywood, and when baseball as a movie started to get prominent and the reasoning behind it and all this other stuff. But they pretty much landed on the book of Field of Dreams. And for those who haven't seen the movie, James Earl Jones is a very prominent figure in that movie. Someone who travels back to the cornfield in Iowa, I think it was, to watch this baseball team that comes out of the cornfield and play baseball, the old Yankees. And so they talked about him in that book. They talked about that he's been in a couple baseball movies that they talked about. And I was like, man, like I really want to read something about Earl Jones. And then James, or Earl Jones, let me not say Earl Jones like I know him. Mr. James Earl Jones. And then he passes away towards the end of 2024, who's been a prominent figure in acting and on stage, and for so many years is the light and the beacon for a lot of actors, for a lot of black actors who are trying to do it big. But I've always wanted to read about Ricky. I was going to say Williams, but his name is not Williams. That's me just slowing my brain down a little bit. I've always wanted to read about Ricky Henderson. I knew how big and how great of a baseball player he was. For me, the very first sport I played was baseball when I was 8 years old. My parents didn't even want me playing football because they said it was too dangerous. And well, not my parents, my mom. My mom didn't want me to play baseball because she thought it was too dangerous. She didn't want me getting hurt. So the very first sport I played was baseball. And baseball just happened to have my baseball coach just happened to be the same coach that had coached the kids in football as well. So once I played football for him, he was the one that kind of was able to talk my mom into letting me play football with them that next year. And so baseball is pretty much my first love. It is an awesome sport. It's gotten a lot better. It's very slow, but also the money that you can make in baseball, you can't even do a right whistle. Man, the money you can make in baseball, hands down. And so there's just a very special part of me that's like, okay, what would have happened if I didn't pursue baseball or pursue football in college and go to the NFL? What if I would have actually tried to see what was up with baseball? Now, to be clear, baseball was my first love, but I also loved football a lot more because football, nothing else is like it. It is awesome. It is probably the pinnacle. There's nothing else like all the hard work you put into it for, you practice with football, you practice 5 days a week and you go out there and play one game. In baseball, you practice maybe 3 times a week and you might play 4 times that week. So it's very different in how it's set up. But with that being said, the book is right here, Ricky by Howard Bryant. And Ricky was before his time. Ricky passed away at the end of last year as well. So over the last couple of years, and I don't know if it's because it's COVID, but we've been losing, and I wouldn't say losing because there are people that die on the earth every day, but I want to say with all the social media, it's more prevalent that when we see somebody pass away, it seems like it's happening a lot. And not gonna lie, since COVID, we've lost a lot of people. But now, and I guess it's what happens when you get older and you get to a point where you've seen a lot of people do some great things, that you're also going to see them pass away. And so Ricky Henderson passed away in December, I think either just short of his birthday. Ricky, oh, there I go. I'm gonna just call him Ricky because I'm about to say Ricky Williams. I'm about to say Ricky. Okay, Ricky Henderson. He's born on Christmas, and that's how his parents knew he was special. But this book is really good. I'm about 100 pages in. It's about a 300 and something, 350 plus page book. And Ricky is just completing his second full year with the Oakland Athletics. But they talk about everything from Ricky as he was as a kid until the point where he grew up and he was in high school. Ricky loved football. Ricky was a football player. He wanted to go to college in the NFL to play football. And he kind of only played baseball because one of his other friends was a baseball player. And they both agreed that the friend would play football with Ricky if Ricky would play baseball with him. And that's what ended up happening. And his friend also got crushed in football, and he was like, "Man, Ricky, I'm done with this football stuff. I don't want to do it." But you can see where Ricky, through this book and in this book already, I already see where Ricky gets all his charisma and his confidence from. For anybody that doesn't know, with Ricky Henderson and just all the stories about Ricky Henderson, he talks in third person. He talks to himself. He's this giant figure. And, kids might ask him for an autograph, and he'd be like, nah, you're not getting one, kid. Like, a little bit kind of, out there sometimes from the stories I've heard. But everybody had a Ricky Henderson story. And there was this one particular story that I've heard since his passing that one day I think somebody was doing some preaching or talking to somebody, and they kept referring to the chapter and verse in the Bible of John 3:16, John 3:16, John 3:16. And after this guy got done talking, Ricky Henderson comes up and he says, "Ricky don't care nothing about John 3:16. Ricky hitting 330." So if that lets you know about his personality at all, I don't think he was done by any means, but at the same time, he was just this person that you would get all these awesome stories and one-liners from. And when you watch him play, he played all out on the baseball diamond. And so I try to pay homage for older people and for that generation by being knowledgeable and about the people that came before us and what they did and the barriers that they were able to knock down in the process. Ricky Henderson was one of the first baseball players, or was the first baseball player to steal 100 plus bases, and he did that in I want to say his first full year playing baseball, and he right now he holds the record for the most stolen bases. And I think the next closest active player isn't even within, I want to say, 1,000 bases of catching Ricky, and which lets you know his dominance and what he brought to the position of playing baseball, and also just his journey. There were people that doubted him. There were people that thought he wouldn't be a good baseball player because his stance and his kind of lateness getting off of the base path, but he just had so much talent, so much natural God-given ability that he just rode with it, and he got better at running bases. He got better as a hitter. He got a lot of walks because he had a, a small strike zone. By the way, he crouched down over the plate that he made it hard for pitchers. And once he got on base, he was going to steal a couple bases and most likely manufacture his team a run. And so that's what I like about Ricky. And one other story I'll tell, Ricky Henderson, there was this problem, and I want to say it was with the Oakland Athletics. I'm not 100% sure. It might have been with a different team. But they were going over their books at the end of the year, and they couldn't figure it out, but somewhere they were off by $1 million. They just didn't know. They had to find the problem about, like, there's $1 million missing. That's a lot of money. So as the story goes, they're calling around to their players and trying to figure out, like, yo, why is this money missing? And Ricky Henderson had a check, $1 million check that had not been cashed. And so the team called him and they go, hey, Ricky, we're trying to find out about this money situation. Do you have your $1 million check? And Ricky was like, yeah, I have my $1 million check. And they were pretty much like, why haven't you cashed it? And he was like, oh, it's just sitting up on my wall. I framed it, I put it up on my wall. So this dude had $1 million check that he framed and put it on the wall of his living room. I think it was his living room, but it's on the wall in his house. And which lets you know how much money he was getting at the time or how much money he ended up getting. But that was his flex. Like, I got $1 million check and I don't even need to cash it. And that speaks more to his personality and his cachet. So once again, I'm not gonna talk your ear off too much. That's Ricky by Howard Bryant. Definitely get into this book. He's from Oakland. They talked about all the people that migrated and grew up and went to his high school that made it professionally, whether we're talking about football or baseball or basketball. There were a lot of people, a lot of young men who grew up in Oakland that went on to play professionally, and so many great players in a small pocket of space at that time that were able to go on and do great, great things. So once again, that's Ricky by Howard Bryant. And finally, last but not least, um, I think it's apropos to talk about everything that's happening in the world right now, with DEI programs getting slashed, with a lot of stuff that's happening with the president right now and things he's trying to roll back. I don't just celebrate Black History Month in February. I don't just celebrate Black history at one point in the year. I celebrate Black history throughout the whole year. I'm always trying to read about Black people who have paved the way for us, whether they've been athletes, entertainers, politicians, community activists, philanthropists, everything under the sun you can think about. I'm always trying to get a leg up and see those people that have done great things for us. And with Mrs. Toni Morrison, one of the best writers I think we can say that's ever lived. And I've read maybe one or two books of hers when I was younger. Definitely The Bluest Eye comes to mind. Some of her poetry that she's done. But with the person that's as great as she is, and let me start by saying what prefaced it. I was in church one day and the pastor was talking and he ended up saying a quote by Toni Morrison. And he said something like, she said, I'm afraid, he said, we're all afraid to do stuff. And he pulls up this quote by this, she's won the Nobel Prize, she's been given so many awards and honorary degrees at places. And she says, I'm afraid that every time I start to write a book, that people are going to find me out. People are going to find out that I'm a fraud or I'm a fake or I'm not that great of a writer. And she says this like every book. She said it for like every time she writes a book. And so as I'm sitting here and talking about and put her in the stratosphere of probably one of the best literary writers and authors of our time, she still second guesses herself all the time when she writes a book. So can you imagine that? Like there are people out here like us who are afraid to do something, who are afraid to do something outside of our comfort zone for fear of failing. And here we have this author who is phenomenal, who is also afraid to write because she wants to do well at it and she wants her stories and her novels to be good with what she's written. So that's what made me pick up a couple of more books by her for this year. And Tar Baby has started off really well. I'm about 3.5 chapters in. And one very good and descriptive thing, she's really descriptive with her writing. There are, how I explain to people, I say, if you're reading and you're not coming across words and not highlighting or having to look them up, um, you probably need some more challenging material. And anytime I read a book by Toni Morrison, right now I'm reading it on Kindle. I checked it out from Libby on the library, and I also have the physical book. But every time every couple pages I'm reading her book, I run across words that I don't even know. And I'm like, oh, let me look that up. Let me sound it out. Let me have them speak it for me really quick. Okay, cool. And these are probably words I'm never really going to use because they're words. I'm not going to say they don't belong in sentences, but they don't belong in my sentences, is what I'm saying. And so her, I don't even know how to give her the right amount of love she deserves. The words she uses are very carefully put, and sometimes it's words to match the time frame that she's writing in, and sometimes the word just goes above and beyond of what she's even talking about or discussing. And so I'll go ahead and I'll say and I'll leave it at that. But right now, it's just a lot of very good descriptive writing. I feel like I can see and feel and that I'm in the room with everything she's talking about. And it's been that way for the couple pieces of work that I've read of hers, but it's also been a while since we've had that time as well. And so with that, I just want to leave it at that because I'm still I'm maybe 20% of the way through this book, but with Black History Month, with a lot of books being banned, with curriculum in schools getting curved and changed, you gotta pick up books. You gotta pick up books that interest you. You gotta pick up books that speak to your ethnicity and your race. You gotta pick up books that are outside of your ethnicity and race. And I will forever harp on that as long as I'm championing for reading. But as we close out, those are the four books that I've read or I'm currently reading this year. Let me know what you're reading. Reach out, follow me on Instagram, go through my Patreon to join Uncle Drew's Book Club. It's $10 a month. You spend more than that on coffee in a day or two, or at Starbucks, at Dunkin' Donuts, at Salt, not oh yeah, Salt and Straw. I like Salt and Straw. That's ice cream out here in Cali. Salt and Straw at what else? Where did I take my boy? Sidecar Donuts, whatever you want to say. Um, it's good to have a community of people that are reading books. It's good to have a community of people to be a part of. And like I said earlier, 2025, I wanted to provide more areas of community for men and for readers. Those are my two biggest things. And so I hope you guys like this book. I don't know what to call this. Book wrap up, a book overview, um, just quality time with Uncle Drew, honestly. That's what I call these things. Quality time with Uncle Drew while I discuss these four books. Super Bowl coming up next week. I got the Chiefs. Don't bet against that boy Patrick Mahomes. Although I do have a friend that coaches for the Eagles as well. So kind of torn, but I hope he can get his first ring. That'll be awesome. But outside of that, once again, this is Uncle Drew. Those are the books I'm reading. I hope you will find, follow, like, subscribe, whatever I do. And even if you don't, I'm still going to jump on and do these things. So take your pick.